I stood on my childhood front porch at midnight, suitcase in hand, after being physically thrown out by my stepdad, Robert, while my mom, Linda, watched in silence. My stepbrothers, Brandon and Tyler, smirked from the window as Robert changed the locks. But what they don't know is that 2 weeks earlier, my late father's lawyer called with shocking news that will turn everything upside down. The house they just kicked me out of, I legally own every brick of it. The cold Phoenix night air hit my face as I stood there processing what had just happened. 28 years old, working as an automotive technician, and I was homeless because of people I thought were family. My biological father died in a construction accident when I was 16. The company's crane collapsed during a high-rise project downtown, crushing him instantly along with 2 other workers. Mom Linda was devastated, and honestly, so was I. Dad had been my hero, teaching me everything about fixing cars and being a decent man. 2 years after Dad's death, Mom married Robert, a guy she met through her book club. Robert seemed nice enough at first, bringing flowers and taking us out for dinner. He had twin sons from his previous marriage, Brandon and Tyler, both 25 now. When they all moved into our house, Robert promised things would get better for our family. He said he'd take care of us like Dad would have wanted. But tonight, as I walked away from the only home I'd ever known, I realized how wrong we'd all been about Robert's intentions. The trouble started 3 weeks ago when I needed to access my inheritance account to buy new diagnostic equipment for work. Dad had left me a decent amount of money in a trust fund, and I rarely touched it except for emergencies or major purchases. When I called the bank, they told me the balance was much lower than expected. Concerned, I asked them to mail me detailed statements for the past 2 years. What I found in those statements made my stomach turn. Transfer after transfer to something called Sunset Landscaping LLC for amounts ranging from $500 to $3,000. Over the past 18 months, $37,000 had disappeared from my account. I'd never heard of Sunset Landscaping, but a quick internet search showed it was registered to Robert Mitchell Hartley at our home address. My first instinct was to talk to Mom privately. I found her in the kitchen making her famous apple pie, the same recipe she'd used since I was a kid. Her graying hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she hummed softly while rolling out the dough. For a moment I hesitated. This was the woman who had tucked me in every night after Dad died, who had worked double shifts at the hospital to keep our house. "Mom, we need to talk about something important," I said, sitting down at the kitchen table where we'd shared thousands of meals together. Her hand stopped moving and she looked up with worried eyes. "What's wrong, Alan?" I pulled out the bank statements and spread them across the flour-dusted surface. "These transfers from my account to Robert's business. I never authorized any of this." Linda's face went pale, and she sank into the chair across from me. Her hands trembled as she picked up one of the statements. "Oh, honey, I can explain this." "Please do, because right now it looks like theft." Tears started flowing down her cheeks. Robert's business has been struggling. The drought made it hard to maintain landscaping contracts, and several big clients didn't pay their bills. He said he just needed to borrow some money to get back on his feet. Borrow! I kept my voice steady despite the anger building inside me. This isn't borrowing, Mom. This is taking money without permission. How did he even access my account? She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "He said you'd never notice since you hardly ever checked the balance. He promised he'd pay it back once his business recovered. I gave him the account information because I thought it would help our family." The betrayal hit me like a physical punch. "That wasn't your decision to make. That money was from Dad. It was meant to secure my future." "I know, and I'm so sorry. Robert convinced me it was the right thing to do. He said we're all family now, and family helps each other." I gathered up the statements, my hands shaking with fury and hurt. "Does Robert know I found out about this?" "Not yet. Please don't tell him tonight. Let me talk to him first." But I was already walking toward the living room where Robert was watching television with Brandon and Tyler. The 3 of them were laughing at some comedy show, completely relaxed while my world was falling apart. Robert, we need to discuss your business finances, I said, holding up the bank statements. The laughter stopped immediately. Robert muted the television and turned to face me, his expression shifting from surprise to defiance. What are you talking about? I'm talking about the $37,000 you've taken from my inheritance account without permission. Brandon and Tyler looked confused, glancing between their father and me. Robert stood up slowly, his 6-foot frame towering over me. That money was invested in improving this family's situation. My business provides for all of us. Your failing business, you mean. And it's not your money to invest. Tyler jumped up from the couch. How can you be so selfish? Dad's been working himself to death to support this family. Support this family. I couldn't help but raise my voice. I pay rent here every month. I buy my own food. I pay for my own car insurance. What exactly has Robert's business done for me? Brandon joined his brother in ganging up on me. You've been living in this house for free your whole life. Dad moved in and made improvements, added value to the property. You should be grateful. The irony of his statement would have been funny if I wasn't so angry. Free. This is my family's house. My father paid off the mortgage before he died. Robert stepped closer, his voice getting louder. Your father's gone, son. I'm the man of this house now, and I make the financial decisions for this family. You're not my father, and you don't get to make decisions about my inheritance. Linda appeared in the doorway, wringing her hands. Please, everyone, let's calm down and discuss this rationally. But Robert was beyond rational discussion. You ungrateful little brat. Everything I've done has been for this family. If you can't appreciate that, maybe you need to find somewhere else to live. The room went silent. Even Brandon and Tyler looked shocked at their father's ultimatum. Are you kicking me out? I asked, unable to believe what I was hearing. I'm giving you 24 hours to apologize for these accusations and drop this money nonsense, or yeah, you need to find somewhere else to live. Tyler crossed his arms. And if you stay here with this attitude, we'll make your life miserable anyway. Brandon nodded in agreement. Nobody wants you here if you're going to cause problems for Dad. I looked at Mom, hoping she'd stand up for me, but she just stared at the floor. The silence stretched until Robert sat back down and unmuted the television as if the conversation was over. That night, I lay in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling, processing the fact that my own family had stolen from me and was now threatening to throw me out for discovering their crime. The walls were covered with pictures from my high school graduation, my first job at the auto shop, memories of better times when I thought I belonged somewhere. By morning, I realized they weren't going to apologize or make things right. So I packed my clothes, grabbed my tools, and prepared to leave the only home I'd ever known. When I walked into the living room with my suitcase, Robert stood up with a satisfied smirk. Smart choice, Alan. Maybe living on your own will teach you some respect. That's when I snapped. Respect you stole from me and then threatened me when I confronted you about it. That's not how family treats each other. Robert grabbed my arm roughly. Get out of my house before I throw you out. Your house? The words slipped out before I could stop them. His grip tightened. Yeah, my house. My name's on the deed now, and you're no longer welcome here. He physically pushed me toward the door while Brandon and Tyler watched approvingly from the window. Mom stood in the hallway crying but saying nothing to stop what was happening. Robert changed the locks behind me, the sound echoing in the night air like a final rejection from the people I'd called family for over a decade. Standing on that porch with nowhere to go, I realized I'd lost more than just my home. I'd lost my faith in the people who were supposed to love and protect me. I ended up at my coworker Jake's apartment complex on the other side of Phoenix, carrying my suitcase up 3 flights of stairs to his small, 1-bedroom unit. Jake worked with me at Mitchell's Auto Repair, and we'd become close friends over the past 5 years. He was the only person I could think of to call at 1 a.m. Man, I can't believe they actually kicked you out, Jake said, clearing space on his couch for me to sleep. His girlfriend Emily wasn't thrilled about the arrangement, making it clear through her body language and clipped responses that she viewed my presence as an unwelcome intrusion. It's just temporary. I assured them both, though I had no idea where I'd go next. I'll figure something out in a few days. Emily rolled her eyes. Your family sounds completely toxic. Why would your mom let her husband steal from you like that? She's been manipulated, I said, defending Mom despite my anger. Robert convinced her it was for the good of the family. The next morning, I called in sick to work, unable to focus on fixing cars, when my entire life had fallen apart. I spent the day calling apartment complexes, but most wanted first month last month and a security deposit that would wipe out my checking account. The irony wasn't lost on me that I had money in my inheritance account, but accessing it would require dealing with more of Robert's theft. That's when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Is this Alan Christopher Morrison? A professional female voice asked. Yes, who's calling? This is Margaret Harrison from Harrison and Associates. I'm the attorney handling your father's estate. I've been trying to reach you about finalizing some remaining documents. I sat up straighter on Jake's couch. Estate documents. My father died 12 years ago. I thought everything was settled. There was a pause on the line. Mr. Morrison, are you not aware of the property transfer that was supposed to take effect on your 18th birthday? Property transfer? What are you talking about? I think we need to meet in person. Can you come to my office this afternoon? We have some very important matters to discuss. Margaret Harrison's law office was located in a professional building downtown, all glass and steel, reaching toward the desert sky. Her secretary led me into a conference room where Margaret waited with a thick file folder and several legal documents spread across the mahogany table. She was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a professional style. Mr. Morrison, I'm somewhat shocked that you're unaware of your father's complete estate plan. When did you last speak with the previous attorney, David Chen? I don't remember ever talking to anyone named David Chen. My mom handled all the legal stuff after Dad died. Margaret frowned and opened the file. David Chen retired 8 years ago, and his cases were transferred to our firm. According to our records, you should have been contacted on your 18th birthday about assuming ownership of the family property. Ownership of what property? She pulled out a legal document and turned it toward me. The house at 417 Maple Grove Road. Your father's will specifically states that the property would transfer to you upon reaching the age of 18 with all property taxes and maintenance covered by a separate trust fund until you turn 25. I stared at the papers, unable to process what she was saying. Are you telling me I own my family's house? Have owned it for 10 years, actually. Your father was very specific about protecting this asset for you. He seemed concerned about potential future complications with remarriage and wanted to ensure your inheritance would be secure. My hands trembled as I read through the documents. Dad's signature was at the bottom, along with witness signatures and an official county seal. But Robert said his name was on the deed. My mom told me they were both listed as owners. Margaret shook her head. According to county records, the only name on the deed is yours. The property was fully paid off by your father's life insurance policy, and the trust fund has been covering all expenses for the past 10 years. Property taxes, homeowners insurance, even basic maintenance costs have been handled automatically. She pulled out another folder. This trust fund has a current balance of $68,000. It was designed to maintain the property until you took direct control. So Robert has been living in my house for 10 years believing he owned it. It appears so. And if he's been collecting rent or making financial decisions based on assumed ownership that could constitute fraud. The room spun around me as the implications sank in. Not only had Robert stolen money from my inheritance account, but he'd been illegally occupying my property while believing he had legal rights to it. What do I do now? I asked, overwhelmed by the complexity of the situation. Margaret leaned forward. First, we need to document everything. I'll need detailed information about the financial theft you mentioned, any improvements or changes made to the property without your consent, and evidence of your family's behavior regarding the house. They just kicked me out last night, changed the locks and everything. They illegally evicted you from your own property. That's a serious crime. She made notes on a legal pad. I recommend we move carefully but decisively. We'll need photographs of the current property condition copies of any financial documents related to Robert's business and sworn statements about what's been happening. Should I tell them I know about the ownership? Not yet. Let's gather evidence first. If Robert has been making unauthorized changes to your property or using it as collateral for business loans, we need to document that before he has a chance to cover his tracks. I left Margaret's office with more questions than answers, but for the first time since discovering the theft, I felt like I had some power in the situation. The house I'd been kicked out of wasn't just my childhood home, it was my property, and Robert had no legal right to keep me away from it. That evening, I told Jake about the meeting with Margaret. He nearly choked on his beer. You own the whole house. The house they just threw you out of, apparently. My dad set it up to protect me, but somehow the information never got communicated properly. Emily, who had been listening from the kitchen, came into the living room with a completely different attitude. Oh my God, Alan. That's incredible. What are you going to do? I'm not sure yet. The lawyer wants me to document everything before we confront them. Jake grinned. Man, the look on Robert's face when he finds out is going to be priceless. But as I lay on their couch that night, I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about how my father had tried to protect me from exactly this kind of situation, and how his foresight was about to change everything. Dad had known that remarriage could complicate inheritances and had structured his estate to prevent me from being taken advantage of. It turned out he'd been more right than he could have imagined. The next morning, I drove past my house during my lunch break from work, parking across the street, to observe the property with new eyes. Now that I knew it belonged to me, I noticed changes that had been made over the years. The front yard had been completely redesigned with expensive desert landscaping, including a decorative rock garden and several large cacti that must have cost thousands of dollars. The driveway had been extended and repaved with stamped concrete in an intricate pattern. Most shocking was the backyard, which I could see through the gaps in the side gate. A large swimming pool with decorative tile work had been installed along with an outdoor kitchen area, complete with built-in grill and granite countertops. None of this had existed when I was living there full-time. I called Margaret from my truck. The property looks completely different from when my father died. Robert's made major improvements without my permission. Document everything with photographs, she advised. Any structural changes or additions made to your property without your consent could be considered unauthorized improvements. Depending on the value, it might actually increase what he owes you. That weekend, I borrowed Jake's camera and spent several hours photographing every angle of the house and yard. The neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman who'd lived next door since I was a child, noticed me taking pictures and came over to chat. Alan, I heard there was some kind of family trouble. Are you all right, dear? I'm figuring some things out, Mrs. Thompson. How long ago was all this landscaping work done? She thought for a moment. Oh, the pool went in about 3 years ago. Took them most of the summer. The front yard was redone last year. Robert had crews here for weeks at a time. Must have cost a fortune. Did they get permits for the pool construction? You know, I wondered about that myself. Usually the city requires inspections for pools, but I never saw any permit signs posted. Robert told me he was handling all the paperwork himself. This information sent up red flags. Major home improvements in Phoenix required building permits, and unpermitted work could create serious legal problems. I made a note to have Margaret check with the city planning office. Monday morning, I took a personal day from work to meet with Margaret again. She had news that made my stomach drop. Alan, I ran a credit report on your social security number focusing on any loans or liens associated with the property address. She spread several documents across the table, each one representing a different financial obligation I'd never authorized. There are currently 4 different loans using your house as collateral, totaling $85,000. 3 business loans for Sunset Landscaping LLC, and 1 personal loan for $40,000 taken out 6 months ago. I stared at the papers in disbelief. How is that possible? I never signed anything. The signatures appear to be forgeries. Look at this application for the largest loan. She showed me a document with my name signed in handwriting that looked similar to mine but was clearly not my actual signature. He's been impersonating me. It gets worse. The loan applications list Robert as your legal guardian, handling your financial affairs due to a supposed disability. According to these documents, you're mentally incapacitated and unable to make financial decisions. The violation felt deeper than theft now. Robert had systematically destroyed my credit and financial reputation while pretending to care for me as family. Margaret continued reviewing the documents. The business loans were used to purchase landscaping equipment and vehicles for Sunset Landscaping. The personal loan appears to have funded the pool construction and other property improvements. So he stole money from my inheritance account and took out fraudulent loans against my house to pay for improvements to my own property. That's exactly what happened. And because the improvements are permanently attached to your property, you're technically responsible for the loan payments even though you never authorized them. I felt sick. How much am I on the hook for? Potentially nothing if we can prove fraud. But that requires filing criminal charges and providing evidence that Robert deliberately deceived the lenders. She pulled out another file. I contacted the bank that issued the largest loan. They have security camera footage from when the loan was signed, and they're willing to cooperate with our investigation. The following day, Margaret and I met with Patricia Gonzalez, the loan officer who had processed Robert's application for the $40,000 personal loan. She was a professional woman in her 30s who seemed genuinely concerned when Margaret explained the situation. I remember this application because the circumstances were unusual, Patricia said, pulling up Robert's file on her computer. The applicant claimed to be handling financial matters for his disabled stepson. He had identification and seemed very knowledgeable about the property value and the borrower's credit history. Did you verify his authority to act on Alan's behalf? Margaret asked. He provided a document that appeared to be a power of attorney, but looking back, I should have required additional verification. The whole transaction happened very quickly. Patricia showed us security footage from the loan signing. There was Robert confidently signing documents with my name, while presenting identification that clearly belonged to me. He even brought copies of my birth certificate and social security card as supporting documentation. Where would he get copies of your personal identification? Margaret asked. I thought about it. Mom probably had copies in her filing cabinet for insurance purposes. When Robert moved in, he would have had access to all our family's important documents. Margaret made notes. This is clear identity theft and fraud. The bank should have verified his power of attorney, but Robert definitely committed multiple felonies. Patricia looked uncomfortable. What does this mean for the loan? If the loan was obtained fraudulently, the bank may be able to void the contract and pursue Robert for repayment rather than Alan. But that's a decision for your legal department. As we left the bank, Margaret outlined our next steps. We have enough evidence now to file criminal charges and civil suits. But before we move forward, I want to confront them with all the evidence at once. If we do this right, we can potentially resolve everything in one decisive action. What kind of confrontation? A surprise visit to your house with sheriff's deputies to serve legal documents. We'll present the ownership papers, the fraud evidence, and a formal eviction notice all at the same time. It'll force them to respond to everything immediately rather than giving them time to create defenses or hide evidence. The plan made me nervous, but I knew it was the right approach. Robert had been systematically stealing from me for years while I was living under his roof, trusting him as family. It was time for the truth to come out. That night I could barely sleep. Tomorrow I would return to my childhood home, not as an unwelcome guest, but as the legal owner confronting criminals who had been living there illegally. The scared, confused young man who had been thrown out with a suitcase was about to become someone who demanded justice and respect. Dad would have been proud. Wednesday morning arrived crisp and clear, typical of Phoenix in early spring. Margaret picked me up at 8:30 in her silver sedan, followed by Deputy Thomas Rodriguez from the county sheriff's department. Deputy Rodriguez was a serious man in his 40s who had handled similar fraud cases before. "Remember," Margaret said, as we drove toward Maple Grove Road. "Let me do most of the talking initially. We want this to be orderly and legal. Once they understand the situation, you can speak as the property owner." My heart pounded as we pulled into the driveway of my house. Robert's landscaping truck was parked in front of the garage, and I could see movement through the kitchen window. They had no idea what was coming. Deputy Rodriguez knocked on the front door with authority. Brandon answered, looking confused when he saw the uniform. "Is Robert Hartley available? We need to speak with him about some legal matters." Brandon called over his shoulder, "Dad, there's a cop here." Robert appeared quickly, his face shifting from concern to anger when he spotted me standing behind Margaret and the deputy. "What's this about?" Robert demanded. "Mr. Hartley, I'm Margaret Harrison, attorney for Alan Morrison. We're here to serve you with several legal documents and to address the illegal occupation of this property." "Illegal occupation? This is my house." Margaret opened her briefcase and pulled out the deed documents. "Actually, sir, this property has been legally owned by Alan Morrison since his 18th birthday. You and your family have been living here without permission for over 10 years. Robert's face turned red. "That's impossible. My wife and I own this house jointly. Our names are on all the paperwork. Your name appears on utility bills and loan applications, but not on the property deed. This house was transferred to Alan through his father's will." Linda appeared in the doorway looking pale and shaken. Tyler emerged from upstairs, drawn by the commotion. The whole family gathered as Margaret systematically explained the legal situation. "Furthermore," Margaret continued, "we have evidence that you've committed identity theft and fraud by taking out loans in Alan's name using this property as collateral." She handed Robert copies of the loan applications with his forged signatures. Robert's hands shook as he looked through the papers. "I don't know what you're talking about. I never signed anything with Alan's name. We have security camera footage from the bank showing you signing these documents while presenting Alan's identification." Linda gasped and grabbed the doorframe for support. "Robert, tell me you didn't do this." "I did what was necessary to protect this family," Robert shouted. "This ungrateful boy was sitting on a fortune while we struggled to make ends meet." Brandon stepped forward. "Dad, what fortune? What's going on?" Deputy Rodriguez took control of the situation. "Sir, I need you to calm down. We're here to serve legal documents and facilitate a peaceful resolution." But Robert was beyond reasoning. "This is my house. I've put 10 years of my life into this property. I've made improvements and paid bills and taken care of this family. With stolen money," I said, speaking for the first time. "You stole $37,000 from my inheritance account and took out $85,000 in fraudulent loans, all while living in my house without permission." Tyler looked shocked. "Dad, is that true? Everything I did was for this family." Robert's voice rose to a shout. "Your college tuition, the pool, the landscaping business that keeps food on our table." Linda started crying. "Our tuitions were paid with stolen money. It's not stealing when it's family." Robert lunged toward me, his face twisted with rage. "You little bastard, you've ruined everything." Deputy Rodriguez stepped between us, his hand moving to his equipment belt. "Sir, step back right now." But Robert was in full meltdown mode. "I've worked myself to death for this family, while this spoiled brat lived here for free. Everything I built, everything I've done." He tried to push past the deputy to get to me, but Deputy Rodriguez was trained for exactly this kind of situation. He grabbed Robert's arm and spun him around, pressing him against the doorframe. "You're under arrest for assault and disorderly conduct. You have the right to remain silent." "Get your hands off me." Robert struggled against the handcuffs. "This is my house. You can't arrest me in my own home." As Deputy Rodriguez called for backup, neighbors began gathering on their lawns to watch the drama unfold. Mrs. Thompson stood on her porch, shaking her head sadly. Other neighbors I'd known since childhood looked on with a mixture of curiosity and concern. While we're waiting for additional officers, Deputy Rodriguez said, "Let me run a quick background check." He called in Robert's identification over his radio. Within minutes, the response came back with information that stunned everyone. "Sir, you have an outstanding warrant for your arrest from Clark County, Nevada. Business fraud and tax evasion. You're wanted for questioning in connection with a landscaping scam that defrauded elderly homeowners out of over $200,000. The color drained from Linda's face. "Nevada, Robert, you told me you'd never been to Nevada." Tyler and Brandon looked at each other in horror. "Dad, what did you do in Nevada?" Robert stopped struggling against the handcuffs. The fight seemed to go out of him as he realized his past had finally caught up with him. "I had a business there before I came to Arizona," he said quietly. "Some contracts went bad. People complained when they shouldn't have. Some contracts went bad," Deputy Rodriguez read from his radio notes. "Sir, you're accused of taking advance payments from elderly homeowners for landscaping work that was never completed. Several victims lost their life savings." Margaret looked at me with amazement. "Alan, your case may have helped expose a much larger criminal operation." As backup officers arrived to transport Robert to jail, the family dynamics continued to unravel. Brandon and Tyler packed hastily, crying and apologizing to each other for their father's crimes. Linda sat on the porch steps, overwhelmed by the revelation that her husband of 10 years was a career criminal. "I never knew," she kept repeating. "I thought he was a good man who was just having business troubles." Tyler approached me hesitantly. "Alan, I'm so sorry. We had no idea Dad was stealing from you or that this was your house." Brandon nodded, tears in his eyes. "We feel sick about what he did, about what we said to you. You must hate us." Looking at my stepbrothers, I realized they were victims too. They'd been manipulated by their father just like Mom and I had been. "I don't hate you," I said honestly. "But I need you to understand that everything has to change now." As Robert was driven away in the police car, still shouting about family loyalty and ingratitude, I stood on the porch of my house as its legal owner for the first time in my adult life. The locks would need to be changed again, but this time I would be the one with the keys. The story broke on Channel 12 News 2 days later. Reporter Sarah Mitchell had gotten word of Robert's arrest and discovered it was connected to a larger pattern of fraud targeting families and elderly homeowners across the Southwest. I agreed to an interview hoping it might help other victims come forward. "I'm here with Alan Morrison," Sarah said, standing in front of my house with a camera crew. Alan discovered that his stepfather had been stealing his inheritance and fraudulently using his property to secure loans. But this case has uncovered something much bigger. During the interview, I explained how Robert had gained my family's trust before systematically stealing from me. He targeted my mom specifically because she was a widow with a grieving teenager. He researched my father's estate before he even started dating her. "What's most shocking," Sarah continued, "is that police now believe Robert Hartley may have been running similar scams in multiple states, specifically targeting families dealing with the death of a breadwinner. After the news segment aired, my phone didn't stop ringing. Neighbors, former classmates, and people I'd never met called to share their own experiences with Robert's business practices. Mrs. Thompson was the first to visit in person, bringing homemade cookies and a folder full of documents. "Alan, dear, I've been thinking about what happened, and I believe Robert may have tried to scam me too." She opened the folder to reveal a contract for landscaping work that had never been completed. He convinced me to pay $3,000 up front for a complete backyard renovation. That was 2 years ago, and he kept making excuses about delayed materials and scheduling conflicts. Mr. Davis from 3 houses down had a similar story. "Robert sold me on an expensive irrigation system for my front yard, took my money, and installed maybe half the equipment. When I complained, he said the rest would be finished when his supply order came in. That was 18 months ago. By the end of the week, Margaret had received calls from 7 different neighbors who believed they'd been defrauded by Robert's business. The total amount of unfinished work and upfront payments exceeded $25,000 just in our immediate neighborhood. This is becoming a class action fraud case, Margaret explained during our meeting Friday afternoon. Robert appears to have been operating a systematic scheme to collect advance payments for work he never intended to complete. The media attention brought an unexpected visitor to my door Saturday morning. Linda stood on the porch looking exhausted and defeated, carrying a small suitcase and an envelope. "May I come in?" she asked quietly. "There are things I need to tell you about Robert that I've never told anyone." We sat in the living room where she'd confronted me about the bank statements just weeks earlier. But now everything was different. This was my house, and she was asking for permission to be here. I knew Robert was lying about some things. She began staring at her hands. But I was so afraid of being alone again after your father died. When Robert said he wanted to take care of us, I chose to believe him even when things didn't add up. She handed me the envelope. "These are documents I found in Robert's things after he was arrested. I think you need to see them." Inside were printouts of internet searches Robert had conducted about my father's death insurance payouts and estate planning. The searches were dated 6 months before he'd ever met Mom. "He researched Dad before he met you." Linda nodded, tears flowing freely. "He specifically looked for information about your father's construction accident and the settlement your family received. He knew about your inheritance before our first date." The calculated nature of Robert's deception was staggering. He hadn't fallen in love with my mother and gradually become greedy. He had targeted our family from the beginning as part of a financial crime. "There's more," Linda continued. "I found correspondence with people in Nevada. Robert was facing criminal charges there when he moved to Arizona. He didn't just have a failed business, he was running from the law." She showed me emails between Robert and someone named Danny discussing how to disappear and start fresh in Arizona. The emails referenced widow hunting as a strategy for finding vulnerable families to exploit. "Mom, why are you showing me this now?" "Because I need you to understand that I was a victim too, even though my choices hurt you terribly. And because there's something else Robert was planning that you stopped just in time." From her suitcase, she pulled out real estate documents showing that Robert had been in negotiations to sell my house to a development company for $450,000. The closing date was scheduled for the following Monday. He was going to sell my house. He told me we were relocating to Mexico for his business, said he'd found a buyer who wanted to tear down the house and build luxury condos. The money was supposed to fund our new life abroad. I stared at the sales contract, realizing how close I'd come to losing everything. If I hadn't discovered the inheritance theft when I did, Robert would have sold my house out from under me and disappeared with the proceeds. "Your legal action stopped the sale," Linda continued. "Robert had to cancel the contract when the title search revealed your ownership. That's when he knew his whole scheme was falling apart. Is that why he kicked me out so aggressively? He was trying to buy time to complete the sale?" "Yes. He thought if you were gone and not asking questions, he could finalize everything before you figured out what was happening." Over the weekend, Brandon and Tyler visited separately to apologize and offer their help. Tyler brought financial records he'd found in Robert's business files, showing payments to several other contractors and suppliers who had been stiffed by Sunset Landscaping. "Dad owes money all over Phoenix," Tyler explained. His business was basically a Ponzi scheme using new customer deposits to pay for previous jobs while skimming money for personal expenses. Brandon had even more disturbing information. "I found applications for credit cards and loans that Dad never told us about. He was applying for credit using our social security numbers too." The scope of Robert's criminal activity kept expanding. Margaret filed additional complaints with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, and the Nevada authorities began extradition proceedings to bring Robert back to face charges there as well. But the most emotional moment came when both Tyler and Brandon sat down with me to discuss their futures. "We know Dad used stolen money to pay for our college," Brandon said. We want to pay you back, but it'll take us years to earn that much money. Tyler nodded. We're both dropping out of school until we can figure out how to pay for it honestly. It doesn't feel right to keep benefiting from Dad's crimes. Looking at these two young men who had called me selfish just weeks earlier, I realized they were showing more integrity than their father ever had. Don't drop out of school, I said. We'll figure out a repayment plan that works for everyone. But don't destroy your futures because of your father's choices. As Sunday evening arrived, I sat in my reclaimed living room, processing everything that had happened. The house felt different now that I knew it was truly mine. But more importantly, I felt different. The scared, confused young man who'd been thrown out with a suitcase had become someone who demanded justice and offered forgiveness when appropriate. The phone rang one more time. It was Deputy Rodriguez with news about Robert's interrogation. Mr. Morrison, I thought you should know. Robert has confessed to multiple fraud charges and provided information about accomplices in Nevada and California. Your case may help us shut down an entire network of family fraud operations. Justice wasn't just being served for me anymore. It was being served for families across multiple states who had been victimized by predators like Robert. Monday morning brought a revelation that made everything else seem small by comparison. Brandon arrived at my door looking shaken, carrying a manila folder that trembled in his hands. Alan, I found something in Dad's office that changes everything. You need to see this immediately. Inside the folder were real estate documents I'd never seen before, along with email correspondence between Robert and a buyer representing a development firm called Southwest Investment Group. The emails were dated just 3 weeks before I discovered the bank statement irregularities. Read this one, Brandon said, pointing to an email from Robert to someone named Kevin Walsh. The email detailed Robert's plan to complete the house sale and disappear with the money. But the most shocking part was Robert's timeline. He had planned to close the deal the Wednesday after he kicked me out, giving him exactly 5 days to finalize everything while I was homeless and unaware of my legal rights. He was going to steal your house and run away. Brandon asked, his voice filled with disbelief. It looks that way, but how was he planning to sign a deed he didn't own? Brandon flipped to the next page, which showed a forged power of attorney document giving Robert legal authority to conduct real estate transactions on my behalf. The signature was a crude imitation of my handwriting, but it might have been convincing enough to fool a busy title company. Dad had everything planned out, Brandon said sadly. Fake documents, a buyer lined up, and a story about relocating the family for business opportunities. If you hadn't caught him when you did, we all would have been living in Mexico while you tried to figure out why your house had been sold. The papers also revealed that Robert had been corresponding with similar development companies in Nevada and California, suggesting this wasn't his first attempt at house theft. Tyler arrived an hour later with Linda, both of them looking exhausted and ashamed. Linda had spent the weekend going through all of Robert's belongings, uncovering the full extent of his criminal planning. I found journals, Linda said quietly. Robert documented everything. His research into your father's accident, his plan to court me, his financial projections for stealing your inheritance. It's all written down like a business plan. She handed me a leather notebook filled with Robert's handwriting. Page after page detailed his strategy for infiltrating our family and extracting maximum financial benefit. One section was titled Long-Term Asset Acquisition and outlined his plan to gain control of my house through marriage to Linda. But the most disturbing entry was dated just 2 months after Robert moved in with us. It read, "The boy is naive and trusting. He'll never suspect systematic withdrawal from inheritance account. Mother is completely dependent and will support any story about family financial needs." He wrote about me like I was a mark in a con game. I said, feeling sick. "Because that's exactly what you were to him," Linda replied, tears streaming down her face. "I was too, but I should have protected you better. I should have seen through his manipulation. Tyler looked at his father's journal with disgust. How could someone plan this kind of betrayal against people who trusted them? Because he's a sociopath, Brandon answered. Normal people don't think this way. Over the next few days, Jake helped me start cleaning and repairing the house to undo some of the damage Robert's illegal improvements had caused. The pool installation had been done without permits, creating potential liability issues. The landscaping had damaged the foundation drainage system, causing water to collect near the house during rainstorms. It's going to cost a fortune to fix all this properly, Jake said, examining the foundation problems. Not necessarily, I replied. Robert's criminal restitution will cover the repair costs, and my homeowner's insurance may cover the foundation damage since it was caused by unpermitted construction. Emily joined us for the weekend work sessions, bringing supplies and helping organize damaged items Robert had left behind. Her attitude toward me had completely changed once she understood the full scope of what I'd been dealing with. I owe you an apology, she said while we sorted through boxes in the garage. I thought you were just a guy who couldn't get along with his family. I had no idea you were dealing with criminal fraud and identity theft. You couldn't have known. Even I didn't understand what was happening until it was almost too late. As we worked, neighbors stopped by to offer help and share their own stories about Robert's business practices. Mrs. Davis from across the street brought lunch for everyone and told us about the investigation into Robert's contractor's license. Turns out he'd been operating without a valid license for over 3 years, she explained. The state revoked his credentials in Nevada, but he kept working under the old license number here in Arizona. Mr. Patterson, who lived at the end of the street, had researched Robert's business registration and discovered that Sunset Landscaping LLC had never paid state taxes or workers' compensation insurance. If anyone had been injured working on one of his jobs, they would have had no legal recourse, Mr. Patterson explained. Robert was exposing everyone to massive liability. The community support was overwhelming. People I barely knew offered tools, labor, and expertise to help restore my house to proper condition. It felt like the neighborhood was healing from Robert's presence by helping me reclaim my rightful place in it. But the most meaningful conversation happened on Thursday evening, when Linda asked if she could stay for dinner and talk seriously about our future relationship. I know I failed you as a mother when you needed protection from Robert, she began. I chose to believe his lies because they were easier than facing the truth about what kind of man I'd married. We sat at the kitchen table where she'd rolled out pie dough countless times during my childhood, but now we were talking as adults dealing with adult consequences. I don't expect you to forgive me immediately, she continued, but I want you to know that I'm committed to earning back your trust, even if it takes years. I was angry at you, I admitted, but I understand that Robert manipulated you just like he manipulated everyone else. You were a victim too. That doesn't excuse the fact that I didn't protect you. When Robert was stealing your inheritance and I knew about it, I should have told you immediately. Linda had enrolled in counseling and found a job at a medical office downtown. She was taking concrete steps to rebuild her life independently without relying on another person to provide financial security. I want to pay rent to live here until I can afford my own place, she said. Market rate with a formal lease agreement. I need to learn how to take care of myself. Mom, you don't need to pay rent. This is still your home. Yes, I do need to pay rent. I need to contribute fairly and prove that I can be trusted with financial responsibilities. Robert convinced me to make decisions about your money because I wasn't taking responsibility for my own. Her commitment to rebuilding our relationship through actions rather than words gave me hope that we could eventually have a healthy mother-son relationship based on mutual respect. By the end of the week, Tyler and Brandon had both found part-time jobs and were making plans to transfer to more affordable colleges where they could work their way through school. They insisted on contributing labor and materials to the house repairs as their way of making amends. We know we can never undo what Dad did, Tyler said, while helping Jake install proper drainage around the foundation. But we can at least help fix the problems he created. Brandon nodded in agreement. And when we're financially able, we want to help repay the money Dad stole from your inheritance. Looking at my family working together to repair the damage Robert had caused, I realized that sometimes the strongest relationships are the ones that survive betrayal and come out stronger on the other side. The house was becoming a home again, but more importantly, we were becoming a real family for the first time. 3 months later, I sat in the federal courthouse, listening to Robert's sentencing hearing surrounded by victims from 3 different states who had come to see justice served. The judge, the Honorable Patricia Williams, had reviewed evidence of crimes spanning nearly 15 years and affecting over 40 families. Mr. Hartley, Judge Williams said, looking directly at Robert, "You have systematically targeted vulnerable families dealing with tragedy and loss. You exploited grief, trust, and love for personal financial gain. Your crimes represent some of the most callous disregard for human suffering this court has seen." Robert's defense attorney had tried to argue for leniency based on Robert's claims of financial desperation and family responsibility. But the prosecution, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Chen, had presented evidence of careful planning and deliberate targeting that contradicted any claim of desperate circumstances. "Your Honor," Attorney Chen said during his closing arguments, "the defendant didn't commit crimes of desperation. He committed crimes of calculation. He researched victims, planned elaborate deceptions, and executed sophisticated fraud schemes over multiple years. This wasn't about feeding his family. It was about living a lifestyle funded by other people's tragedy." The evidence presented during the hearing revealed the full scope of Robert's criminal network. In Nevada, he had targeted elderly homeowners living on fixed incomes, taking advance payments for home improvement work that was never completed. In California, he had run a similar scheme involving landscaping and pool installation for families who had recently lost breadwinners. But the most disturbing revelation came from Robert's own journals, which detailed his methods for identifying and approaching potential victims. He had subscribed to obituary services and monitored estate sales to find families dealing with recent deaths. He would research the deceased person's insurance payouts and property values before making contact with survivors. Mr. Hartley kept detailed records of his victim selection process, Prosecutor Chen explained. He specifically sought out widows with teenage children, believing they would be most vulnerable to his romantic manipulation and least likely to question financial irregularities. One of Robert's accomplices, Danny Morrison, had testified in exchange for a reduced sentence. Danny revealed that Robert had trained him in the same victim selection and approach techniques, and that they had been planning to expand their operation to Colorado and New Mexico. "Robert taught me how to research families online," Danny testified. He said widows with kids were the best targets because they were desperate for help and wouldn't ask too many questions about money. When it came time for victim impact statements, I was the first to speak. Standing at the podium facing Robert, I felt calm and confident in a way that would have been impossible 6 months earlier. "Robert targeted my family at our most vulnerable moment," I began. "He exploited my mother's grief and my confusion about becoming an adult without my father's guidance. But his greatest miscalculation was underestimating my father's love and foresight." I looked directly at Robert as I continued. "My father structured his estate specifically to protect me from people like you. His wisdom and planning gave me the tools to stop your crimes and seek justice not just for my family, but for all the families you've hurt." Several other victims spoke about the financial and emotional damage Robert had caused. Mrs. Patterson from Nevada talked about losing her life savings to Robert's fake landscaping company. The elderly couple from California described how Robert's abandonment of their pool project had left their backyard unusable and their retirement funds depleted. But perhaps the most powerful statement came from Linda, who spoke about the psychological manipulation she had endured. "Robert didn't just steal money," she said. "He stole my ability to trust my own judgment. He convinced me to betray my own son's interests and made me complicit in crimes I never would have imagined committing. The hardest part of recovery has been learning to trust myself again. When all the evidence had been presented and all the statements heard, Judge Williams delivered Robert's sentence. Robert Michael Hartley, you are sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for conspiracy, fraud, identity theft, and racketeering. You will serve an additional 3 years of supervised probation upon release, during which time you are prohibited from engaging in any business activities involving home improvement, landscaping, or financial services. The courtroom was silent as the reality of the sentence sank in. 12 years meant Robert would be nearly 60 years old when released, too old to easily restart his criminal career. But the financial restitution was equally important. Robert was ordered to pay $112,000 in damages and stolen funds across all cases, with priority given to victims who had lost the most money. My inheritance account would be fully restored, and the fraudulent loans against my house would be voided. Additionally, Judge Williams continued, Mr. Hartley's cooperation in identifying other members of this criminal network has helped federal authorities arrest and prosecute accomplices in 4 states. While this cooperation doesn't excuse his crimes, it has prevented additional families from being victimized. After the sentencing, I spoke with several other victims outside the courthouse. Many of them had found my story through news coverage and had contacted authorities with their own experiences of Robert's crimes. Your courage to come forward gave the rest of us courage too, said Mrs. Patterson from Nevada. I thought I was the only one stupid enough to fall for his tricks. You weren't stupid, I assured her. He was a professional criminal who studied how to exploit people's trust. None of us could have known what he was really planning. 6 months after Robert's sentencing, I stood in the backyard of my house watching Jake and Emily help Linda plant a vegetable garden where the illegal pool had been removed. The pool's removal had been covered by criminal restitution funds, and the space was being converted into something that would benefit the whole family. Tyler had transferred to Arizona State University and was studying business administration while working part-time at a local bank. His experience with his father's crimes had motivated him to understand legitimate financial systems. Brandon had chosen to study criminal justice at community college, hoping eventually to work with fraud victims. I want to help people avoid what our family went through, Brandon explained during one of our weekly family dinners. Maybe I can use Dad's techniques to teach people how to recognize and avoid financial predators. Linda had completed her counseling program and was excelling at her new job. She had also started volunteering with a local organization that helped fraud victims navigate the legal system. Her personal experience with manipulation made her particularly effective at helping other victims understand they weren't to blame for trusting someone who turned out to be a criminal. But perhaps the most significant change was in my own life. Using the restored inheritance funds and a business loan secured by my property, I had opened Honest Automotive Repair in a small shop near my neighborhood. Jake had joined me as a partner, and Emily handled our business administration. The name says everything about what we're trying to build, I explained to customers. After dealing with someone who lied about everything, I want to run a business based on complete honesty about repairs costs and timelines. Our reputation for integrity had spread quickly through the community. Customers appreciated detailed explanations of problems and upfront pricing without hidden fees. Many of them had heard about our family's experience with fraud and wanted to support a business that had emerged from that struggle. The day that meant the most to me, however, was when I received a letter from the Arizona Attorney General's office informing me that I had been selected to receive the Community Hero Award for helping expose financial crimes against elderly citizens. Your willingness to pursue legal action against family members who had betrayed your trust helped authorities identify and prosecute a criminal network that had been operating for over 15 years. The letter read, Your courage has prevented countless future victims from experiencing the financial and emotional damage you endured. At the awards ceremony, I met other recipients who had shown similar courage in challenging difficult situations to protect their communities. One woman had exposed corruption in her city government, despite threats to her family. A man had reported workplace safety violations that could have killed coworkers even though it cost him his job. Heroes aren't people who aren't afraid, the Attorney General said in his speech. Heroes are people who do the right thing, even when they're terrified of the consequences. As I stood on the stage accepting the award, I thought about my father and how proud he would have been. His careful estate planning had protected me from Robert's crimes, but more importantly, his example of integrity and courage had given me the strength to fight for justice when it mattered most. That evening, our whole reconstructed family celebrated at the restaurant where Robert had first proposed to Linda 12 years earlier. But this time we were celebrating justice, healing, and authentic relationships built on trust and honesty. I've learned something important through all of this, Linda said, raising her glass of sparkling cider. Real family isn't about blood or marriage certificates. It's about people who choose to support each other through difficult times and celebrate each other's successes. Tyler and Brandon nodded in agreement. Despite everything their father had put us through, we had chosen to rebuild our relationships based on mutual respect and shared commitment to doing better. And I've learned that fighting back against injustice isn't about revenge, I added. It's about protecting yourself and others from people who would take advantage of trust and kindness. The restaurant was filled with the comfortable noise of families sharing meals and creating memories. But at our table, there was an extra layer of appreciation for the simple joy of being together, honestly, without secrets or hidden agendas. As we prepared to leave, Jake raised an interesting question. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't found those bank statements when you did? I'd probably be homeless, and Robert would be living in Mexico with $450,000 from selling my house, I answered. But honestly, I try not to think about that anymore. What matters is what actually happened. Justice was served, our family relationships were rebuilt, and we're all stronger now. Driving home through the Phoenix streets where I'd grown up, I reflected on how much had changed since that night I stood on my porch with a suitcase feeling abandoned and betrayed. The young man who had been confused and hurt by his family's rejection had become someone who demanded justice and created positive change in his community. But the most important lesson wasn't about fighting back against criminals or reclaiming stolen property. It was about the difference between relationships based on manipulation and relationships based on genuine care and respect. Robert had taught us what fake family looked like. Now we were learning what real family could be. Sometimes the people who try to destroy us end up giving us exactly what we need to become stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. Robert's betrayal had forced our family to confront hard truths about trust, responsibility, and authentic love. In trying to tear us apart, he had accidentally taught us how to build something better. As I pulled into the driveway of my house, truly my house now, I felt grateful for my father's wisdom, proud of my own courage, and hopeful about the future we were all building together. Real family, I had learned, isn't about perfection. It's about people who choose to support each other's growth, admit their mistakes, and work together to create something better than what came before. And that kind of family is worth fighting for. What's the most important lesson you've learned about standing up for yourself when family members betray your trust? Have you ever had to choose between keeping peace and demanding justice in a difficult family situation? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family betrayal and finding justice. Share this with someone who might need encouragement to stand up for themselves in a difficult situation. Remember, sometimes the hardest battles are the ones that teach us who we really are and what we're truly capable of achieving. Thank you for listening, and I hope this story reminds you that justice and healing are always possible even when the situation seems hopeless.